back to Law and Crime. Hey, if you haven't done so yet, get at the keyboard there and send us your questions regarding the Jamell Demons trial out of Florida. He's accused in the multiple shooting deaths of Anthony Williams, Christopher Thomas Jr., buddies apparently of his in the rap world, and prosecution says that he turned on him. We just heard some very interesting stuff from the father of Christopher Thomas Sr., interviewed by Anjanette Levy. And there's so much going on in there. I want to ask my guests here. Terry Austin's here. Also, Afi Patterson is here. She is an attorney and an expert in this hip-hop world. And also at the courthouse, Bryson Paul. So, Terry, just give me your takeaway from that interview with the father of one of the victims.
Well, two main takeaways, Michael. First of all, he is really not happy with Melly and the way Melly is acting, not just in the courtroom, obviously, but prior to that when he didn't go to the funeral. I mean, it seems as though he was personally hurt by his inaction, by not coming to the funeral, by not expressing any grief, any remorse. And then the other main takeaway from that interview was there is a motive maybe here that we heard from Christopher's father. The motive might have been financial, and oftentimes it is financial. Now, obviously we know prosecution does not have to show motive, but if in fact they were going to sell their brand, the YNW brand, and get money for that and, sell it for licensing or marketing, and, Melly wanted to make more money and he could make more money if there are less people to split it. Well, I mean, that's a motive. So those are the two main takeaways, but I thought he was really being very forthright. Great interview there.
It really was. Let me follow up with that with you, Afi, because, this hip-hop world is your expertise. We're talking about big money in these licensing deals, in the music deals. Does this make sense to you, this story that we just heard from one of the victims' parents, that kind of money was being tossed around or at least talked about?
Absolutely, and you're correct. In the hip hop world, just in the music entertainment industry as a whole, there's money in licensing. It's not going to necessarily be in your streams anymore. So I love that he brought that up, and I think it's also interesting because I think we heard yesterday that Kevin Liles is going to testify. And I believe he's the CEO of the label that they were involved with. I think it's 300 Entertainment. So I look forward to see how the prosecution is going to handle that. Also, I think that something the prosecution hasn't done yet is lean into motive. As Terry said, motive is not an element of the crime, but we all want to know motive. We all want to know why. It can be as simple as we got into a fight the day before. It can be as simple as a money issue, but we need to know. And I think that the prosecution needs to focus on motive because I think they did do a great job establishing that I think Sack and Juvy were killed from inside of the vehicle. And they need to lean into the fact that the drive-by was staged. It was a conspiracy, and it was a conspiracy hashed out of a motive for more money.
We see this quite often, these acts after the fact that seemed like a great idea to the defendant at the time to either cover up a crime or create an alibi. This was pretty elaborate. And if there's no forensic evidence to support that drive-by theory, I think that may be enough to give this jury a reason to convict, just because it makes it seem even more devious than the original crimes to go that far to create this alibi. Hey, let me ask you this question. This was what I had mentioned before going into the break. I'm going to give this to you, Afi. This was Bobby Renee. Do you think Melly taking the stand will help or hurt him in this situation?
It depends on what he has to say. Only Melly knows that. Only his defense counsels know that. I think it's really challenging when a defendant takes the stand because, again, they're under such heavy scrutiny. So, even his walk to the stand, people are going to scrutinize that. When he starts answering questions, they're going to say, okay, is he whispering? Why is he not speaking up? Or is he speaking too loudly? He looks remorseful. Does he look remorseful because he's guilty? He doesn't look remorseful. Does he not look remorseful because he's trying to portray that he's innocent and not guilty? I mean, anything you do is going to be questioned, and it just depends on how the observer is leaning, how their pre-existing feelings, and if they're swayable or not. So it's just never a good idea. But in addition to that, there's so many things from a defendant's background that may be brought up. A defendant also may open the door to evidence that isn't admissible, but because he mentions it, you can now open the door to it and the prosecution can attack it. So it's not always advisable to have the defendant take the stand. But the bigger question is going to be, why is Bortland not taking the stand? Because he's available, he's out there. The jury for sure is going to want to know why. Why isn't the prosecution calling him? And hey, why isn't the defense calling?
And you just wonder how sophisticated the jury might be. I mean, each person's a little different, but I think many of them will process it and say, well, what's he going to say that doesn't hurt him in his upcoming trial? So it would be, kind of a difficult position he'd put himself in. Maybe the jury figures that out. Maybe they don't, and they hold it against the prosecution for not putting him on. Again, we're taking your questions today as we talk about this case out of South Florida. It is a double murder case. It is a death penalty case, at least as it relates to Jamell Demons. So, Terry, let me see. I've got one here for you. I made a circle on this one here. Oh, was there anything found? This comes from it. Now, it could be at Demon, or it could be pronounced differently. So it says it Demon from YouTube. The question is, was anything found on Jamell Demons' clothes, like DNA?
Well, based on what I heard, I think it was not anything that was conclusive. They found, gun residue, they found some DNA, but nothing that said that, specifically either Melly or, in fact, Henry could have been responsible for this crime. So I thought the prosecution spent a lot of time with experts going through what could have been possible with DNA, giving us lessons about, the gun and the DNA and the trajectory and the trajectory. I mean, it just was a lot of information, but nothing very factual. At the end of the day, when you came across at the end of the prosecution's case for those experts, I didn't come across with anything conclusive as far as the DNA was concerned.
Yeah, and it's obviously a lot still to play out here. We're 4 days into trial. They're off today. They'll be back at it on Tuesday. There is the holiday on Monday. So what we like to do? We like to look ahead. So I've got a question for you, Bryson. We're far from this particular question, but this is from Talia Murray from YouTube, asking, is Fredo going to testify? Fredo going to testify. Do you know anything about that?
Actually, great question. Actually, there has been no documentation that shows that Fredo will testify, even though he has been mentioned several times as one of the people that Melly was with that morning of the murder. Now, it's being accused that Melly used him as a scapegoat, but it's no confirmation, and there's nothing that proves that Fredo had any involvement in this incident or anything anything around it. So we haven't gotten any clues, haven't gotten any documentation from the defense or also the prosecution. So we just got to wait and see. But I can definitely say Bolton will not testify, or Bortland will not testify, because it's a 99% chance that he'll plead the fifth.
Okay, well, if Fredo has nothing to say to hurt himself, maybe he will testify. Terry, here's a question from Champion. Do you think, this is really looking down the road here, do you think Melly would get the death penalty if convicted?
I don't. First of all, we have to get him convicted. The prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and so far there is plenty of doubt for this jury. They haven't really put the gun in his hand. They really haven't put him in that car shooting from behind. We'll see what the future evidence might be. I mean, we heard the father talking about the gunshot to the head, the death shot. So maybe at some point they will. But even if he is convicted, they're going to have to prove aggravating factors, and some of the aggravating factors I think might be difficult. Was this heinous? Was it cold? Was it calculated? Some of those might exist, but I think the death penalty is reserved for those really atrocious crimes where there are multiple victims, even more than 2 victims, and where the crimes are so heinous that they're involved with rapes, etc. Not that being shot to death isn't heinous. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, all murders are heinous, but I don't think that we'll get the death penalty. If you think about the Nicholas Cruz case, that case, he did not get the death penalty, and there was nothing more heinous than that crime.
And there was a lot of outrage, too, because
Absolutely.
people were saying, if not then, when? And it's so interesting now. We know the death penalty requirement for the jury decision is different. They've waffled back and forth in Florida. It used to be, didn't have to be unanimous, and then just a few years ago they changed and said, yes, it must be unanimous, and now they've gone back the other way. Afi Patterson, what do you think about just that procedural wobbling in Florida?
I think it's up to the people. I'm from Louisiana, my home state, and for a while, I think to convict, you only needed 10 of 12 jurors, and recently, it's now you have to have a unanimous verdict. So it's just the will of the people, and it's different state to state.
Yeah. Now in Florida, it's hard to keep up, but now it's 8 out of 12. If 8 out of 12 vote for the death penalty, that in fact is it shall be imposed by the court, and that's critical to the legislative language. It's not a question. He has no discretion. He has to impose it if the jury votes for it. Okay, so let's take a break here. Again, we're handling your questions, and we're going to continue to do so as we move through this hour. Stay where you are, or hit the keyboard at your favorite social platform. Send us your questions. We'll be back right after this.